to Kinross. From this vantage point on Vane Farm Hill, we can see across the beautiful Loch Leven, bounded by hills, the Lomans, the Ochels, Craggy Cleash and the sleeping giant of Ben Arty. But the town of Kinross, the loch itself and the many picturesque villages that are around it have a rich and ancient history. And we're going to explore some of the legends, stories and the people who have shaped Kinross into the place we know today. The town of Kinross was an important staging post on the Great North Road from Edinburgh to Perth. In 1755, Kinross was Scotland's second smallest county with a population of just under 6,000. The county had an agricultural economy and the town itself was a centre for linen manufacture, weaving and the cutlery trade. This building is Kinross County House. Buildings like these were often known as the Tolbooth, and this is where the freeholders of the town would have held their courts and justices of the peace would have conducted their business. The centre of the town's civic life, this county house also served as the local jail. What's interesting about this county house is that until very recently it was one of Robert Adams' least known public buildings. It was thought that no drawings had survived, but the original designs were rediscovered in 2009. Its prominent position on the road north would have advertised Adams' accomplishments to travellers and locals alike. Robert also made sure everyone knew of his contribution by placing an inscription above the window in the central bay.
When Rosie May comes in with flowers to deck her gay green spreading bars, then busy, busy are his hours, the gardener with his paddle. The crystal waters gently fall, the merry birds are lovers all. Scented breezes round him blow, the gardener with his paddle.
Adams' County House is in keeping with the ordered classicism and formal gardens of nearby Kinross House. This beautiful house and gardens was created by Sir William Bruce in 1693. Regarded as the founder of classical architecture in Scotland, Bruce is best known for designing the Palace of Holyrood in Edinburgh for Charles II. He laid out his own mansion and garden so that the view down the main avenue leads the eye directly to a medieval ruin across the water of Loch Leven, a place that once held a queen captive.
Yestreen the queen had four Marys, the next she'll hae but three. There's Mary Seaton and Mary Beaton and Mary Carmichael and me.
Loch Leven Castle will forever be associated with Mary, Queen of Scots, who came here on 4 occasions. In 1561, she came as the guest of Sir William Douglas. In 1563, she met John Knox here and she argued with him about the persecution of Catholics. But it was her third marriage to Patrick Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, that was to bring about her downfall. In June of 1567, Mary surrendered to her rebellious lords and within 2 days she was a prisoner in this island castle. It was here she was forced to abdicate in favour of her infant son James, but she was determined to escape. With the help of Willie Douglas, who looked after the boats, she fled her island prison within a year. At the beginning of the 19th century, the demand for food from a growing population encouraged landowners and farmers to seek new ways to increase production. This resulted in a radical plan which sought to alter nature itself. The Kinross estate and neighbouring landowners came up with the idea of lowering the water level of Loch Leven. If this could be achieved, they reckoned they could increase the land available for farming by over 1,000 acres. By cutting a new, deeper channel for the River Leven and controlling its flow by sluices, the water of the loch would recede and free up a significant amount of new land.
Well, the building we're standing next to is a sluice house, and that controls the water that flows out of Loch Leven and on down the River Leven to the Firth of Forth. Well, the lowering of the loch, which took place back in the 1830s, a lot of people think that was to do with supporting the mill owners downstream and providing water, a regular supply of water, but it wasn't that at all. This was all about providing land that could be reclaimed by the local estate, Kinross estate. And it was the idea of a man called George Graham in the 1790s, sitting in Kinross House looking out over the loch. He thought, how about lowering it or even getting rid of it completely, which seems a crazy idea, but it had been done elsewhere. We're in the agricultural revolution, anything is possible. And the plan was to lower the loch by about 4.5 feet ultimately and reclaim the land and create new farms, and in the process increase the value of the estate. But a lot of the mill owners weren't terribly happy about this. They didn't want the loch lowered, they wanted a bigger reservoir of water, and actually, if anything, they wanted the level raised. Now, the water flow is controlled by the River Leven trustees, who were set up as a result of the Act of 1827. And they will regulate the amount of water coming out of these 5 sluice gates. And that originally was done manually. Now it's done automatically. But that will obviously vary the level of the loch. And there are various interests to take into account, not just the interests of mill owners down the river, but also the interests of farmers. If you back the water too much, you end up flooding farms around the loch. If you let too much water out too quickly, then you flood farms down the river. And on top of that, particularly in recent years, with the designation of Loch Leven as a national nature reserve, you have conservation interests to take into account. You don't want to suddenly be raising water during the breeding season when the wildfowl are breeding, the ducks are breeding on the loch. So all of these interests have to be balanced in managing the water flowing out of Loch Leven down the River Leven.
The whole of Loch Leven can now be circumnavigated on foot or by bicycle. And on the southern shore of the loch is the RSPB Loch Leven Nature Reserve.
RSPB Loch Leven has been here for almost 40 years, providing a special habitat for the wetland birds here, but also as a main site for education and a place to come and visit and learn about wildlife. The lowering of the loch by 1 metre meant that the wetland areas had dried out, so what we've put in place for conservation is to ensure that we have wetland areas again. So we have a series of sluices which enable us to control the water levels and re-flood areas again. We provide a space to learn about what wildlife you might see here and how we manage the land, both the woodlands and the wetlands. We provide education visits for schools, but also just a great day out. We've got a visitor centre, a cafe and also a shop, and lots of viewing platforms to see wildlife from.
On the far side of the loch from the Castle Island is another larger island, St Serfs. This is now a noted wildfowl breeding site and wintering ground for migrant geese. But the island was occupied by priors of the Augustinian order until the Reformation.
This is my favourite spot on the whole loch, and it's known as St Serfs Island. It's the largest island. In the medieval period it would have been considerably smaller because the loch level was higher. And what makes it special is that it's the site of what's known as St Serfs or Loch Leven Priory. And you can see there's a stone building, that's a 19th century shepherd's bothy which is built into the ruins of the priory, and the oldest surviving bits of the priory are 11th, 12th century in terms of the masonry that you can see, but there's probably been a monastery there since at least the 10th century, and it's dedicated to Saint Cerf, who was a Pictish bishop who operated around 700 AD. Well, Nicola, now we're at a place called Port Moke, and if we were back in the medieval period, we would practically, standing here, have our feet wet, because we're very, very close to the original level of the loch. And the clue here as to why we're here is this mound, which is the site of a chapel, a medieval parish church, and probably buildings connected with the monastery on St. Cerf's Island. We know there's a site here by the 10th or 11th century from the documentary record, but there's a piece of early medieval sculpture, a Pictish cross slab, that was found here in the later graveyard in the 1970s, which indicates that there was something here in terms of a monastic or church site in the 9th or 10th century.
Professor David Munro was the person involved in the excavations at the site of Old Port Moke.
I turned over one gravestone, and under it I saw another stone peeking out. So I got the trowel in and gradually scraped it, pulled it gently out, turned it over, and what did I find? This is what I found. A stone that's now called the Port Moke stone. And this was identified as a stone, a 1,000-year-old stone, dating back to possibly the 10th or the 11th century. And you can see how beautiful the interlacing is. There's some damage. A big chunk has been taken out of this corner, but at some stage that was resting perhaps in the building of the old chapel and parish church down by the Loch side. Well, it was just after I turned this stone over and looked at it, I was quite stunned, and I thought, this is probably the most exciting thing I've ever discovered. And since discovering it in 1976, I've travelled the world on expeditions, but the most exciting thing I've ever found has been the Port Moke stone.
There are various small villages which are picturesque and each has their own story to tell. Port Moke, which at one time would have sat at the water's edge, and the delightful Scotland Well. It was a kind of a medieval spa. Friars who occupied a hospice here around 1250 recognised the restorative qualities of the water, which was said to cure illness.
Well, Nicola, it's a very important site known as a holy well, because it's where people came essentially on pilgrimage looking to take some of the waters away or drink some of the waters here so that they might be cured of whatever illness afflicted them. Very significant place of pilgrimage in the medieval period. Even King Robert the Bruce came here at one point. We know there was at least one hospital here, which we have records back to the 12th century regarding that, and they would have certainly used the waters from the well as part of their medical, almost magical treatments. We can see, if we look down and see the water bubbling up through the sandstone, how people looking at that might have thought that there was something magical or supernatural about the place, and so that's how it then starts. People come along and start taking the waters, and in return they make offerings. So we can see lots of coins still in here. People still throw a penny or whatever in for luck. Well, in the past it would have been to thank the gods or to thank God, and to say, I hope this works for me and I will be cured. We know from work in this very area that people were making offerings of metalwork in the Bronze Age into the loch here, and I've brought a couple along to show you. The one here is what's called an early Bronze Age flat axe. It's about 4,000 years old, and you can see it's got a lovely herringbone patterning on it. And beside it we can see a much smaller object which we call a razor, because we do think it was used for shaving the male face, and it has a lovely bit of decoration on it as well, and these were both thrown into the loch as offerings to the gods and goddesses of the place 3,500 to 4,000 years ago.
Small birds were lining the bleak autumn branches, preparing to fly to a far sunny shore, when the tinkers made camp at a bed.
Kinross is another beautiful village, and it was here in this house that the gentle poet of Loch Leven was born. His name was Michael Bruce. Born the son of a weaver in 1746, Michael started his education in the village and then went to Edinburgh University. As a young man, he taught locally himself and then studied theology. However, he was struck down by tuberculosis and returned to his home in Kinross before his death in 1767, aged only 21. In his short life, he gained a reputation as a scholar and poet, and two local men, David Marshall and Robert Burns Begg, the grandnephew of Robert Burns, decided to buy Bruce's home, collect his work, and keep the house as a memorial to this young poet of Kinross. The house was opened as a museum in 1906 and can still be visited today.
Well, sadly, many of the poems of Michael Bruce were lost after he died. An alleged friend from university days, John Logan, came to Kinross and asked the parents to give him the manuscripts. He was going to republish them, but they never heard from him again, and they never saw anything from what he had proposed to publish. So this has been quite a controversy over many years. Who wrote some of these poems? Was it John Logan? Was it Michael Bruce? Well, I think we've now put that to rest with all the research that's been done by many, many people. People like the Reverend William McKelvey, who was a local minister. And in 1837, he published the first life and works of Michael Bruce. And with the proceeds, he built this memorial in Pope Moke Parish Churchyard to the gentle poet of Loch Leven.